In the sprawling, restless city of Viridian, beneath the hum of neon lights and the rhythm of people chasing purpose, lived a young man named Lucas. His heart beat with the quiet urgency of dreams, grand, intricate dreams sketched on the back pages of tattered notebooks and napkins in coffee shops. From the beginning, Lucas was wired differently, not for noise, but for depth. He wanted to build, not just buildings, but entire worlds, structures that sang in glass and stone, had testaments to beauty and order. But life, ever the stern teacher, began his education not with triumph, but with rejection. His first dream, the architecture program at the university of his choice, crumbled before it began. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday, its words stiff and polite. "We regret to inform you." It felt like a door slamming in his soul. Then came another and another. The rejections piled like snow against his ambitions, burying his spirit in a slow, cold silence. Still, he tried. He applied to smaller schools, sought apprenticeships, took odd drafting gigs, anything to keep the ember of his dream alive. Parallel to this professional struggle ran the raw, quieter ache of personal heartbreak. His first love, Sarah, was like spring incarnate, wild curls, paint-streaked hands, and a laugh that made everything else seem small. But she was chasing her own storms, and Lucas's steady dreams weren't enough to hold her in place. One afternoon, she vanished from his life, leaving a note scrawled in charcoal: "I love you, but I need to find myself." He read it until the paper blurred from his tears. Then came Emily. Her love was gentler, more measured. Books stacked in every corner of her apartment, conversations that felt like rivers winding through old cities. Lucas dared to believe again. But one day, in a small cafe they'd claimed as their own, she broke the silence with words that shattered him. "I don't think we're going the same way anymore." Each rejection etched invisible scars on his soul. They didn't scream, but they whispered constantly, "You are not enough." He carried those words like stones in his chest. Despite the weight, he built something, earned a degree, got a modest job at a small architecture firm, and eventually met Amelia. She was a beam of light. They married quietly in a garden with ivy-covered walls, and for a while it felt like peace. But peace can be fragile. When the economy faltered, Lucas was laid off without ceremony. A 10-minute meeting, a handshake, a box of belongings, and suddenly he was adrift. At first, he tried to pretend, to stay strong, to polish his resume and send out hopeful emails. But inside, something was breaking. Days lost their color. Mornings became a struggle. He found himself sitting at the kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing while a cold cup of coffee steamed into oblivion. Amelia tried to reach him, but grief had made him a ghost. Then, as if mirroring his internal unraveling, the cracks in his marriage deepened. The silences became heavier than arguments. Amelia, loving but worn thin, began to slip away emotionally. One evening, with tears streaming and apologies echoing in the hallway, she left. "I need to live, Lucas," she whispered, "and you're disappearing." That night, Lucas sat on the floor of their empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes of memories. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just was, a shell filled with absence. In the weeks that followed, he withdrew from the world. Friends' calls went unanswered. The curtain stayed drawn. His phone battery died and remained uncharged for days. But deep within the darkness, something unexpected began to happen. At 3 a.m. on a restless night, Lucas found himself at his old desk, flipping through one of his sketchbooks. His fingers moved instinctively, pencil to paper, tracing lines that felt familiar and true. He designed a house, not for clients, not for approval, but for a man who had lost everything. Walls that curved like open arms, a window that framed the morning sun, a space that held him. He began to build, not with concrete, but with intention, one sketch at a time, one breath at a time. He journaled his pain, sometimes scribbling nonsense, other times pages of brutal honesty. He went for long, aimless walks through the city, letting the skyline speak to him. He read books on Stoicism, Buddhism, design theory. He started to freelance again, not for glory, but for healing. Slowly, the fog began to lift. He took a job renovating community centers, small work but meaningful. He volunteered, mentored young dreamers who reminded him of his younger self, and he kept designing. Not buildings for the rich, but spaces for the human spirit, libraries that breathed quiet, shelters that felt like home, parks that invited reflection. Lucas never became famous, but that was never the goal. He built a modest studio near the river, sunlight flooding in through large windows, ivy curling up the stone. People began to notice his work, not flashy, but soulful. He spoke at workshops, taught young architects not just about form and function, but about failure and the art of rebuilding. Years later, when asked about his success, Lucas would simply smile and say, I lost everything once, and in losing, I learned how to build again. Not just buildings, myself. And in the heart of Viridian, among its steel towers and restless noise, there stood a quiet space of peace and beauty, a home he designed for himself, from rock bottom, brick by soul wrought brick.